The second type of market you need to be familiar with is monopoly. A monopoly is characterized by there being a single supplier of a good for which there is no close substitute. A monopolist consciously looks for a price that will maximize its profits and therefore is referred to as a price setter or a price seeker. The good supplied by the monopolist is an unique good. The chart summarizes the differences between monopolists and the perfect competitor. First, let's look at the difference in the number of producers in each market. The monopoly has only one producer. Perfect competition has many producers. Think hundreds of thousands or millions of producers. Next, let's look at the type of product produced by the monopolist and the perfectly competitive firm. The monopolist produces an unique good. Further, there are no close substitutes for the good, so consumers cannot switch from what the monopolist produces to another good. The perfect competitor produces a homogeneous or standardized good for which may be easily substituted for one produced by another firm. Let's look at the type of demand curve faced by the monopolist and the firm in a perfectly competitive market. The monopolist has a downward sloping demand curve, which implies there are places where the demand for the good is price inelastic, or that increases in prices will only bring about small decreases in the quantity demanded. This characteristic makes sense because the monopolist produces a good for which there are no close substitutes, and the monopolist can increase the price without reducing the quantity demanded all that much. The perfectly competitor's demand curve is perfectly elastic, and as a result is drawn horizontally. Entry refers to the ease at which an individual can enter the market. Monopolists usually have high barriers to entries. These include requiring large capital investments to start the business, economies of scale, or requiring large output to produce efficiently, or problems raising adequate capital to start the business. Entry into a competitive market is relatively barrier-free and may be simple as creating a firm. The monopolist's marginal revenue is less than the price of the good, and the marginal revenue of the perfect competitor is equal to the price of the good. Monopolies exist for several reasons, but the overriding reason for monopoly is a barrier to entry. There are several reasons why barriers exist. First, the monopolist may own resources for which there are no close substitutes. For example, for a long time a firm called De Beers controlled the market for diamonds used in jewelry and in industry because it controlled the majority of the diamond mines principally in southern Africa. Second, a firm may have difficulty raising adequate capital to enter a market. For example, to start an automobile company, individuals would need to raise billions of dollars to design and build the automobiles, which would be difficult to find, especially during economic difficult times. Third, a firm may produce efficiently only when it produces large numbers of output. Fourth, processes of producing the product may require ongoing large capital investments. For example, a supplier of electricity would constantly be prepared to rewire large portions of its distribution network and upgrade its electrical generating facilities. Fifth, the government may grant monopolies to encourage innovation. The government does this through patents on products and copyrights on media. Sixth, the government may set up or allow monopolies to carry out social policy which it thinks benefit the citizens, or the cost of compliance with regulations may act as a barrier. Seventh, network externalities may create monopolies because the cost of switching to a newer product is high, and because the user has to learn a new system or use equipment that have equipment that no longer will work. Let's look at the monopolist's demand curve. Since the monopolist is the sole supplier, it faces the entire market demand for its good, and the demand curve is downward sloping. The demand curve is downward sloping because the monopolist will need to lower the price per unit to sell more of its product. The graph shows a typical demand curve for monopolists. Let's see why the monopolist must lower its price to increase the quantity demanded. Let us suppose that a monopolist is selling 2 units of good at $12 per unit. The monopolist's total revenue is $24. Remember that total revenue is price times the quantity sold, and in this case the price is $12 and the number of units sold is 2, so the total revenue is $12 times 2 units, or $24. However, the monopolist wants to make more money. If the monopolist raises the price to $14, he will sell only a single unit of the good. Or 14 times 1 is $14, so his or her total revenue would only be $14. So raising the price of the good is not going to increase total revenue. So the monopolist decides to see what happens to demand when the demand for the good he or she produces is decreased to $10. If the price decreases to $10, the monopolist sells 3 units. So the monopolist's total revenue is price times the quantity sold, or $10 times 3 units, or $30. The only way for the monopolist to increase the amount sold is to decrease the price. Also notice that the monopolist's total revenue has increased from $24 when 2 units were sold to $30 when 3 units were sold. There are 3 consequences of price cutting for the monopolist. First, the firm produces more of the good. 2, the firm is able to collect a larger amount of total revenue. And 3, the firm is forced to cut prices for all customers of the good. Compare the perfect competitor's demand curve with the monopolist. You may recall that the perfect competitor's demand curve is horizontal and therefore perfectly elastic. On the other hand, the monopolist's demand curve is downward sloping and has places of inelasticity. Let's take a minute to look at the monopolist's marginal revenue. As you may remember, the marginal revenue is the additional revenue a firm receives from selling an additional unit of production or of output. The formula is the quantity of total revenue 2 minus total revenue 1 divided by the quantity of total production 2 divided by total production 1. Remember that total revenue is abbreviated as TR and total production as TP. Remember, the procedure for calculating the marginal revenue is 1. To write down the formula for calculating the marginal revenue. Remember, the formula is the quantity of total revenue 2 minus total revenue 1 divided by the quantity of total production 2 minus total production 1. Select the starting level of output production and label it TP1. Label the total revenue for that level as TR1. Select the ending level of the output production and label it TP2, and label the total revenue for that level as TR2. Subtract TR1 from TR2 and subtract TP2 from TP1, and divide the change in total revenue by the change in total production. Here's a monopolist production, price per unit, and total revenue. Remember, the marginal revenue for production of 0 is always NA. Using the formula, the other marginal revenues are calculated. So when the monopolist produces 1 unit of output, it is $14. When the monopolist produces 2 units of output, it's $10. When the monopolist produces 3 units of output, it is $6, and when the monopolist produces 4 units of output, the marginal revenue is $2, and when the monopolist produces 5 units of output, the marginal revenue is minus $2, and when the monopolist produces 6 units of output, the marginal revenue is minus $6. Now let's add the marginal revenue curve to our graph. Notice that the demand curve is in blue. By graphing the amount of product produced by the firm with the corresponding marginal revenue, the marginal revenue curve, the pink line, is created. Notice the marginal revenue curve, the pink line, is below the demand curve, the blue line. The monopolist is said to be a price searcher, meaning that the firm must look for a price and output combination to maximize profits. The two criterion that the firm will use are marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue and the profit maximization rule. There are two ways to determine what the monopolist will produce, either using a graph or using a table with the amount of production, marginal cost, marginal revenue, and total profit. The procedure for finding where the monopolist will produce and the price of the good using a graph is as follows. Find where the marginal cost curve is equal to the marginal revenue curve. Draw a line down to the quantity output axis. Read the quantity off the total production or output axis. Draw a line up to the demand curve and then over to the price axis, and read the price off the price axis. Let's look at an example of this. Here's a graph of a monopolist's marginal cost curve, MCM, marginal revenue curve, MRM, and the demand curve for the good, DM. To find the amount of product produced by the monopolist, locate where MR is equal to marginal cost. The marginal revenue curve is equal to the marginal cost where the marginal cost curve crosses the marginal revenue line. This occurs at point P. Next, draw a line from the point where the marginal revenue curve crosses the marginal cost curve, in our case to the output axis. In the graph, this will occur at 10 units of production. Next, draw a line from the point where the marginal cost curve crosses the marginal revenue curve, point P in our example, to the demand curve. And next, draw a line from the point on the demand curve. Next, draw a line from the point on the demand curve to the price axis. Our monopolist will produce at 10 units of production at $6 per unit. The procedure for finding where the monopolist will produce and the price of good using a table is as follows. Find where the marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Move across the columns to the profit associated with the marginal cost being equal to marginal revenue. This will give us the total profit. Move across the columns to find the quantity associated with the marginal cost being equal to marginal revenue. And finally, move across the columns to the price column that's associated with the marginal cost being equal to marginal revenue. Here's the table with the monopolist's price, total production, marginal revenue, marginal cost, and profit. How much product will the monopolist produce and at what price, and what will be the monopolist's profit? Let's see if the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue. The monopolist's marginal revenue is $12 and the monopolist's cost is $4. Since $12 is not equal to $4, the answer to the question is no. The marginal cost is not equal to marginal revenue. The reason the monopolist will not choose to produce here is the monopolist could make more money by producing more units of the good. If the marginal revenue is the marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost, it's 700 units of production. The monopolist's marginal revenue is $10 and the monopolist's marginal cost is $4.60. Since $10 is not equal to $4.60, the answer is no, the marginal cost is not equal to the marginal revenue. The reason that the monopolist will not choose to produce here is that the monopolist could make more money by producing more units of good. Is the marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost at 800 units of production? The monopolist marginal revenue is $8 and its monopolist's cost is $5.30. Since $18 is not equal to $5.30, the answer is no, and the marginal cost is not equal to marginal revenue. The reason the monopolist will not choose to produce here is that the monopolist could make more money by producing more units of the good. Is the marginal revenue equal to the marginal cost at 900 units of production? Since the monopolist's marginal revenue is $6 and the monopolist's marginal cost is $6, and since $6 is equal to $6, the answer is that the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue. Since marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal, the monopolist will choose to produce here because any increase in production will lead to a decrease in profits. Move across to the profit column. Notice that the problem of 6,300 is the largest number on the table in the profit column. Not only has the marginal revenue equal to marginal cost true, but the monopolist's profit is at its maximum. Look across the table to the quantity sold. Notice that the monopolist sells 900 units at this point, so the quantity that the monopolist will produce is 900 units. Next, look across to the price column. Notice that the monopolist will sell his or her product at $15 per unit. The monopolist always earns a profit by calculating the difference between the place where the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue and the price of the product. The monopolist profits is the blue box. The actual amount of profits could be calculated by multiplying the difference between the marginal revenue, about $4.25, and the price, $6, or $1.75 times the quantity sold, say 10 units. So in this example, the monopolist makes $17.50. One of the ways a monopolist can increase his or her profits is to engage in price discrimination. That is the practice of charging a different set of customers different prices. The price determinants only works if the following conditions are met. First off, the good has a down-sloping demand curve. 2. The demand for the good is inelastic for some groups of consumers and elastic for other groups. 3. The firm must be able to identify those different groups of buyers. 4. The firm must be able to prevent the resale of the good between the groups. Firms that supply electricity engage in price discrimination by charging businesses a higher rate for electricity than they charge for households, because it is next to impossible to resell from the consumers to the businesses the electricity.